So in today's session, after this 40 minutes, we hope that you'll very much be able to apply 5 different reflective cycles, or indeed create your own. Use some different phrases for critical analysis and reflection. I'll be pointing out some really helpful tools, including Grammarly Premium and referencing to help you with those parts. And we'll be looking at different parts of reflective language and also trying to think about some of the feedback we've received in the past and how we can apply that to this assignment. So for the first slide, if I can just encourage everybody in the audience to go to www.menti, it's at the top of this slide here, so www.menti.com. And it will ask you to put in a code, and the code for today's presentation is 97776431. And once you put that in, it will allow you to respond to the different cues in various slides. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just finish this sentence for me. Give me the definition of reflection, what it means to you. So it should just allow you to put in what you think reflection is. And Glenn and Peter, feel free to put in yours. I'm sure you've got some great thoughts there as well as Rochelle. So I'll just leave that up for a moment. So it's www.menti.com. And the code is 97776431. You can use a computer, an iPad, or a phone to send in those responses. Great. Thank you. So we can see we're getting some responses coming in here now, which is great. Yes, I like that one. So, it's giving it serious thought and serious consideration. Yes, so we were talking before about, diarizing as an example of where you actually have a little bit of time at the end of each day to sort of think about your day and write down and consider what went well and what didn't. So I'll just leave that for another moment just to see if we get any more thoughts on that. Oh, thank you. Yep. So yes, I like that. That's a very nice, clear definition. So, it could be a piece of writing, though I guess it could also be just a thought. That really concentrates on a critical reflection. And I think that's really crucial. And we'll be looking and unpacking what criticality is. And another great definition there. So, it's again in that word consider coming through, really breaking it down to strengths and weaknesses and, thinking about how you're going to adjust and improve those thoughts in the future. So taking those multiple perspectives. So thank you for those. And they were really, really helpful. So this is a definition which is amalgamated from 3 different dictionaries, Chambers, Oxford and Cambridge. And quite similar, you'll see, to those that you put forward just now. So it's that, thinking, reflecting critically, and really integrating the knowledge and then going on to do something with that knowledge. I recommend this link here, which is to 150 dictionaries, which are good quality dictionaries. And as I say, normally when I come up with a definition, I will try and synthesize the different sources to create my own knowledge. And also, this is a good link to a thesaurus, because one of the things when we're writing reflectively that's quite difficult, for me anyway, is finding enough adjectives and enough synonyms for reflection. So this is Roget's thesaurus, which is a very good one that you can use. So now what I thought would be useful for the next few minutes is just to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the history, if you like, of reflection. Now, there are more than these 6 reflective theories that I'm going to talk about, but these are probably the ones that you might have heard of. Some of the famous ones here. So you may already use a reflective theory, and I think Peter, you mentioned Kolb when we were talking just before. But any other reflective theories that any of you currently use? So Kolb, yeah, is a very famous and very useful one. Anything else that anybody might be currently drawing on? Okay. Well, again, I would recommend that, perhaps at master's level, there's a very interesting piece of work done by the QAA in Scottish universities. It was a piece of work over 3 years, which looked at the concept of what is masterness. In other words, what qualities do we look for in master's students? And of course, they came up with, evaluation, reflection, and creativity. So I would suggest that whilst you listen to some of these reflective theories, you might think about how you can in fact adapt, amend, or create your own. Another one that's just been mentioned here is Gibbs, one of my favorite ones too. So let's have a look at some of the differences. So back in 1920, John Dewey came up with this idea. So he said experience is not enough. Everyone can have experiences and keep on having experiences, but can you actually get anywhere unless you reflect on experiences? I've got a 19-year-old son who's absolutely, in fact, it's his 19th birthday today. And my son is lovely, but he hasn't quite learned that second bit yet. So, recently, for example, he flew down to the South Island, hired a hire car, flipped it immediately, had to pay, a huge amount on his insurance. And then when I came back, I said, what did you learn from that? And he had to scratch his head quizzically, said something like, well, I hope rabbits don't run out in front of my car again. And so you can see we've got a bit of a way to go with his reflection. But Dewey's model is quite interesting, and sort of talking about you've got this impulse, but you do need to keep going around it to build and develop your skills. So it's quite a nice framework. But Borton decided this was a little bit too abstract. So he said, in order to keep it in our heads, we need to have just 3 dimensions: what, so what, and what next. So I quite like that one, and I tend to keep that one in my head a little bit, especially when I'm teaching, to try and actually reflect in the moment, not necessarily always on the moment. So Kolb was the one we heard about earlier, and that's coming in 1984. And so Kolb, breaking it down to 4 separate stages of the circle. So, one really concrete experience, and focus on your feelings. How did you intuitively feel it went? And then what does our general knowledge tell us about how that's gone? And then go and plan with a colleague and reappraise it. So hopefully, for example, my son, now having discussed it with me, would not use a cheap hire company which had, a very poor hire car available. He would also read the conditions of the insurance and drive a little more slowly. So hopefully he's got to that stage. But Gibbs took it one stage further, which I think is quite useful. And we heard that was one of our favourite ones here. So, he actually breaks it down to assumptions as well. So talking about, what was good and bad, and are you doing things based on a previous assumptions. So slightly more stages. And again, very useful for when you're reflecting. I quite often use these titles, if you like, or processes as subheadings, which gives a nice structure to a reflection, a kind of logical structure. You can see they're all quite similar, but have different elements depending on the practice. So John's then came in from a medical background, and John's this particular model came about because nurses in the UK, there were a lot of deaths being caused when nurses didn't feel confident enough to challenge the doctor's instructions. So the doctor was giving an instruction and saying, no, the dose is, I don't know, 50 millimeters, give the patient that dose. And the nurse felt that the power relationship was too strong. They didn't feel they could challenge, even though they knew it was possibly the wrong thing to do. And so patients died. And as a result of that, they put this reflective model into practice in the wards. And it had a very powerful effect. And it got people to think about, it doesn't matter if the influencing factors are very strong, you still need to do the right thing and challenge. So that's quite an interesting one, and a nice extra dimension. Then Aikins and Murphy came in and they sort of said, well, very similar things, as you can see, but I like the fact that they have a big block on discomfort, so, I'll give you an example of that. I was just teaching a lecture previous to this one, and I was halfway through, and I suddenly realised that I was talking about memory and exams and that type of thing, and I could feel that the students actually knew a lot, about the subject already. So reflecting on that, I've thought, well, actually, next time I'm going to have a slightly more advanced version of that PowerPoint to be able to jump out of. I did what I could, but I did feel quite a bit of discomfort for a few minutes while I reappraised and re-engaged what I needed to do there. And the current famous person writing about reflection is Jenny Moon. We have several of her books here in the Unitec library, and she sort of says again that what's really helpful is you only start to really make sense of it when you go through that painful process that is writing. So typically when I teach a lecture on academic writing, I might have 100 students in a room. And if I ask them to put up their hand if they actually find writing pleasurable or easy or a nice process, I normally get 1 or 2 hands up in that room. And I guess what she's trying to say is that, it will be tough writing down all those different processes. It will be tough actually challenging yourself and going and reading on a new piece of material and perhaps changing your practice. That's not going to be easy. But by doing that, it becomes a crucial way of keeping people learning. So I quite like hers. So no matter which reflective cycle it is, you'll see that there are some very common stages there. So, talking, describing briefly what's happened. And briefly is a key point there. Whenever I mark reflective writing, the most common comment I probably write on it is, you haven't focused critically enough, you haven't unpacked assumptions enough, you've spent too long describing. So, of course, I need to understand the experience, but what I'm really interested in is the critical analysis, particularly at a postgraduate level. So, keep that nice and short and succinct would be my advice there. So, this challenging and unpacking assumptions is really, really important, and it's actually quite difficult to do. So, recently, I was teaching at Auckland Business School, and I was teaching a group of new master's students, and they were 96% Chinese. And they were telling me that obviously in their system, to be able to memorize and work in that way and listen to direct instruction was very comfortable for them. So could I change my teaching style, which very much was based on discussion and students doing things? And I was quite resistant to this, but I said to myself, I must read all of the research on direct instruction and memorization and see if I'm right. I mean, yes, I might have studied for postgraduate qualifications in teaching, but maybe they've all been coming from the same church, and maybe I need to look at that. And sure enough, I looked at Professor John Hattie's work, which is a meta-analysis of all the studies on teaching over the last 20 years. And one of his key conclusions is that direct instruction is not only powerful, but one of the most effective tools. So since that time, I have kind of really actually changed my practice quite a lot. And that's what I think good reflection can do, kind of really force you to creatively rethink ideas, but based on good research. So these are some questions which you could ask yourself, and they might again provide quite a helpful reckoner as you go through. So as we were talking before, where we were talking about, we were all reflecting on group work and sometimes being quite a painful and challenging form of assessment. And, you know, I openly admit, you know, that it nearly always is, because you're working together as a group in a short time, aren't you? So reflecting on that, you know, go through all of these different steps, but I guarantee you would have learned a lot. You would have challenged all sorts of beliefs that you had, and you would have definitely taken some learning forward. So they might be helpful. Now what I'd like you to do is, as you probably know, most of the education systems around the world are based on the work of Bloom, or Anderson's reworking of Bloom, which is a taxonomy of skills. In other words, some skills are ranked higher than other skills. And at postgraduate level, on your business course, there will be some skills that you will hear your lecturers talk about a great deal. And at master's levels, there are some skills in particular we are looking for. So what I'd like you to do with these skills is reorder them, ranking at number one. What is the highest level of skill that we hope you realize as you go through your postgraduate studies? And what are the lowest type of skill that perhaps you would be just focusing on at school? So I'll just give you a few moments to do that. So again, it's www.menti.com, and the code is the same as before. It should now appear on your device as a new slide for you to move around, and you just drag and drop those into the order you think they might fall in. Fantastic. I can see we've got one response in there, so I'll just wait a couple of moments just to see if we get agreement on these. Great, so I can see we've got a couple of responses in there now. Absolutely perfect. So well done. So what I want you to think of now is how these relate to reflection. So you're quite right. The top skill there is around, at level 9, which means like PhD or a very good master's students. We want you ideally to be creating your own ideas. And I know you've been studying design thinking, and that is highly creative. And I'm sure you've come up with some brilliant ideas. But in terms of reflection, as I say, what I would hope is that perhaps you would look at those reflective cycles, you would come up with your own reflection that's going to work for you. And obviously the original ideas come through reading deeply and widely and pulling in that new knowledge. So reflection coming a very close second. You can't get to creating, is Anderson's view, without reflecting deeply. And I think, I would absolutely agree with that. And these skills, there's a lot of discussion around in the literature around if these skills should sit actually horizontally, because can you actually differentiate them? Because you kind of have to do all of them. But you're right, the general way to move through them would be to analyze and apply. So you might look at 3 different studies, you might link them together, and then you apply that to your practice there. And making sure that you really critique and criticize both yourself in a constructive way and others' work. And these ones at the bottom, you're quite right. So really, we don't want to see in masters, well, I don't anyway, want to see particularly any quoting unless it's, you have a strong justification for copying and pasting someone else's words across. And understanding is really what we would be hoping you fully achieved at high school. So it's these higher ones that we really want to see in your assignments. And you'll see those reflected in the criteria. And Peter has very kindly created a wonderful resource on the various criterions used for reflective writing from different universities. I think that's a really useful resource, and I would recommend that you have a look at that one. So well done. So you'll see here, this is Bloom's revised taxonomy, and you'll see sometimes it gets a little bit simplified down, and the reflection is sometimes explicitly put next to creation or between evaluate and create. And there are some verbs breaking down there, what types of things we expect you to do. But one of the things I recommend is always look at your criteria, look at those adjectives, so you really know what Peter or your other lecturers are looking for, and also, of course, the weighting. So if it says evaluate and apply a wide range of sources, and that's weighted 30%, you need to give 30% of your time to that part of the criterion. Sometimes it's worth spending quite a bit of time looking at that. So that's just a definition of those skills. I've talked about them, but that's just a slide there for you to refer back to. I won't read it through. And this is a example paragraph where they're talking about the importance of reflection, as I say, in the patient care. And certainly, to go back to that example I gave, a lot of the issues that, really were life-threatening issues have managed to be now ironed out of those institutions. So definitely worth putting that in systematically. So what is reflective writing? So it is, we want your personal response, and Peter has included in the Moodle site some lovely examples taken from all different modules of good reflective writing. And what I like about those examples is I like the variety, I like the liveliness of them, I like the diversity, I like the, really personal ideas that are shared and learning journeys that are shared. So again, I would absolutely encourage you to spend time looking at those exemplars, because that has been shown time and time again to be one of the best ways for you to get a sense of what we are looking for when we say write a reflective essay. But it is not, and as I say, it's not about describing. So I was teaching some midwives at the University of York reflective writing, and they actually weren't allowed to include the descriptive part when they handed it in. They had to just include that in the appendices. And what the lecturer was trying to get them to focus on is focus on the critical unpacking of ideas, focus on the future, focus on how you will do things differently. So it looks and feels quite different from a standard academic essay. So in standard academic essays, obviously we spend a lot of time saying to students, don't personalize. You have to use a cool and impersonal stance in academic writing. So don't use I, me, etc. But here, it's perfectly okay to put in the first person, because you have to say, reflecting on this significant event. I felt, I had this experience. So, highlight that it was a significant event. What was, why did you choose that particular thing? So you might say in group work, I'm just thinking back to the last piece of group work I did as a student. And I had a very, what I call a freeloader, working in that group. So it was a significant experience because no matter how many times you've worked in a team with a freeloader, there's still very tricky customers to manage. So I would choose that. And I would say, well, at the time I noticed this person was giving lots of excuses, but subsequently I found that those excuses, were perhaps untrue. You have to use that first person there. Another way, you could obviously focus on the essay itself to vary, not having too many first person expressions. This is taken from the University of Portsmouth, who produced a very comprehensive handout on reflective writing, as do Oxford University. So I'll share those with Peter later, and if they're useful, he can put them up on Moodle. But I quite like the way this breaks it down and shows it graphically, some of the ways you can get variety, because one interesting thing about academic writing is when they analyze, when you analyze vocabulary in any study, it correlates with the amount of money you'll earn, the type of partner you'll end up with, if you're going to be promoted or not, the grade of the essay. Obviously, it has to be used correctly. But vocabulary is hugely powerful, and we get very bored if we hear any repetition in academic writing. So I would say you need to really focus on that. Don't stick to one word and hang on to that. And you'll see in those examples on the Moodle site, there's some lovely expressions as well. And I encourage students to always notice when they're reading other reflections, and there are lots of exemplars all around the world's good universities' web pages. Monash, for example, has a whole set of examples by discipline. So have a look at them, notice the words they're using, and adapt them. So here are some words that I've just highlighted, that most of academic vocabulary comes from Latin and Greek terms. That's been shown by Avril Coxhead, a Kiwi academic. These are some examples of them. And obviously, means again. So you've got all of, research, to search again, and then in reflection, reappraise, reconsider, reassess. You can see that cycle moving round and round. So you need to also explicitly tell your reader that you're integrating the practice. So for example, the example I gave before was saying, well, in light of the theory from Professor John Hattie, I have reflected on my practice because this is a large study. This is a meta-analysis. So it's 200 studies in a way. So I'm going to take this seriously, and I'm going to try and really change my practice there. So, tell us that you've integrated it and tell us why. Because you've been informed by a systematic review, which means, again, you've reviewed the literature properly. And if you're not sure of how to review your literature, remember you've got a fantastic subject librarian, Donna, and there's a whole group of them. Go and have an appointment with them and learn how to do a systematic review, because that will really help you find quality information and then be able to use that. So on that note, I just ask you to rate these different types of sources, because we have to remember that we read a subject, so about half of your time is assumed to be in academic reading. So it's very, very important, but not only important that you read, but that the quality of what you read is essential. So I want you just to drag these clines across now, if you agree with them. So for example, if you say, okay, I've looked at Encyclopedia Britannica, to what extent do I think that is going to be a great source in an academic assignment? If I think that's going to be great, I'm going to drag it across, obviously, to the agree side. So I'll just give you a moment or two to collectively do that, and then I'll talk a little bit to that. And I invite, obviously, Peter and Glenn, to comment if you want to as well on what you would hope to see in terms of good quality reading. Thank you. So I'll just leave another moment just to see if I can get a couple more responses in there. Okay, so I'll just talk to some of these. Thank you. There's another one in there. That's great. Oh, there we are. I think we're nearly all in. We're looking for 4 responses, I think, all together. So yes, here, lovely to see that we've got these 2 up nice and high. So it's that kind of, as I say, meta comes from the Greek word meaning many. And so quite often when I put in a search term to the library databases or Google Scholar or Microsoft Academic, I will start with the words meta-analysis of feedback or whatever it is that I want to get, because that's going to give me a really good starting point. Someone else, a whole team of researchers normally have done that research. But obviously not all subject areas have undergone meta-analyses yet, so you might also choose a nice big study that's been done over a large scale, done by a high quality university. You can trust that it will have been peer reviewed, and the journal it's published in is likely to be a high quality, perhaps A or B rated journal article. So up here as well, as you say, any peer reviewed journal article we can pretty much trust, because a peer-reviewed journal article, generally someone writes an article, like your professors, Peter, and that will go into a 2-year process normally. sometimes a bit faster in business, where it will be peer reviewed by about 6 other academics who are also experts in the subject. So in a sense, it's been really cleaned up before it gets to you, and a good scholarly book. Yeah, absolutely. Harvard Business Review, I like a lot because it's so accessible for me as a non-expert. It's peer reviewed, it's well edited, but it also tells a good story. So it's somewhere in between, that journal article. And of course, business professionals read it regularly to keep up to date and keep reflecting on their practice. I still read articles, for example, about leadership, to try and make sure that what I've learned about leadership is not now out of date. And I do learn a great deal by having that come in regularly to my inbox. But I would agree with you, these types of things, stuff, news article, it's not peer reviewed, it's not edited, it does have a bias. We can't therefore really trust it. And an encyclopedia is just general information. So it might be something you read to start with to get an understanding about like what is design thinking, but certainly you don't want to be citing that as an interesting or reliable source. It's more of a starting point and for you there. So one way of evaluating sources is to evaluate them by this mnemonic here, which is quite memorable. So making sure, as it says there, it's up to date, it's relevant, the person is an authority, and you've got some great sources linked on your Moodle website there. And, that it's really up to date as well is often forgotten. And things like Microsoft Academic will look at very up to date conference publications and abstracts. So that's quite a nice way to find those. So these expressions come from a wonderful resource called Academic Phrase Bank, and I've shared a PDF of this with you. This was created by a colleague of mine, John Morley, at Manchester University, and John had even bigger classes than I used to get at York. University of Manchester has 44,000 students in it, so his job was to stand in front of a lecture hall with between 500 and 1,000 students and teach them academic writing. And he would ask them that question, how many of you love it? And the ones who put up their hand, he paid them about $10 to give their assignments to him. And he stripped out just the key phrases. And then he used this with the work of Swales and Feek, who are 2 American scholars who've been working for the past 30 years, analysing how academic work is structured. So he kind of combined the two. And so what you get with Academic Phrase Bank is both information about how to structure an introduction, say, or a conclusion or an abstract, whatever you're writing, but also the phrases. And it has no copyright on it because it's Creative Commons. So it's there to help you get your academic voice going and improve your academic voice. And you can see things like very useful. These little things here, found, report, show, indicate, suggest, are called reporting verbs. Now, obviously, you're going to have to report a lot of reading because you read it and you have to say you've read it. But the average student uses 10 reporting verbs, and there are 400 used in academia. So there's an interesting correlation, which obviously is if a student uses many of these, they tend to get high marks because they're showing critical thinking. So, for example, if I say suggest, it means I'm not sure. But if I say this study demonstrated, it means I agree with this study. So it tells the reader what you're thinking. So those are just my groupings of reporting verbs. And if you're interested, I can share. I rather sadly wrote that list of 400, but I would suggest you probably need to know about perhaps about 30 or 40, something like that, in order to be able to truly express your critical thinking. And I guess another point to think about is that when you're writing your reflection, It's a conversation between scholars. So hopefully when Peter is reading your writing, it's inspiring him. You know, you're telling him about new ideas. You know, Peter obviously is a great expert on design thinking, but hopefully through what you've read and thought, you're adding material to that discussion. So it's important to think about that. It's your job to inspire. It's your job to lead the discussion forward, as well as, of course, you know, summarize what is already known. So here's a question for you. You probably know about some of these free tools and support that there is here at Unitec. You know, one of the things coming to Unitec from the University of York in September, I was very pleasantly surprised at just the wealth of support that there is here. There's more support here than there was there. That's a Russell Group, very well funded university. So that's great. But I just want to check that we know about some of these. So if you can just send in which tools or what types of support there might be, that would be great. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. Great, and it's great to see my team coming up there because they are a great support. Of course, I'm biased, but it's true. So there are 16 learning advisors based on both campuses, and we're very flexible. We work by Zoom, we work in face-to-face, we work one-to-one, we work with small groups. We come in and also very happy to deliver bespoke sessions, tailored embedded sessions too. And yes, within your school, of course, you have Mary Lynn, who is sort of coordinating extra support for you there, which is great. And your subject librarians, I mentioned before, Donna, and there's another 5 as well that you can see. And as you mentioned there, Grammarly Premium. So Unitec has bought Grammarly Premium, which would normally cost you about $200. And it's available for students, so I absolutely advise you to use it. I started working with Grammarly Premium at Auckland University in 2013, and now Auckland University gives it to every single student and member of staff. The studies have found that it not only improves students' work, but also it, of course, assists your reader to read for content. So I strongly advise, and I know Peter's kindly sent out a link again last night, encouraging you to get that license, because it talks about not just your grammar, your punctuation, it checks plagiarism, and it checks for academic voice as well. It's got a very clever piece of software that will, for example, say this is too informal or this is difficult to read. It uses lots of clever things. I like this comment over here, which is brilliant to see. You know, there's some of those studies I talked about before. So Phil Race and John Hattie and Sally Brown, you know, looked at feedback basically, and they found that the single most powerful effect on learning is formative feedback. So take advantage of this. You know, you've got fabulous experts here. And what I say to my students is don't worry, I don't want to see perfect. I want to see a draft. Yeah, I want to see a draft. And of course, you've got Turnitin, which is great. So you can check, you know, to see that your paraphrasing is good, but also Turnitin will, of course, check the accuracy of your references, which is kind of another benefit of that. And if you're not sure about what you're looking at in Turnitin, you know, you're very welcome to come and see a learning advisor. We can talk you through what that is showing. So yeah, it sounds like you've got a great idea about that. Oh, there was another one just popped up there. Brilliant. Yes, and what a good idea. Present a masterclass. Yes, and get feedback from other students and teachers. Absolutely. there's a next week, one of my learning advisors, who's a postdoc researcher, will be presenting a 3-minute pitch to the rest of Unitec about her current project, which is about an octopus on roller skates, talking about trying to balance postdoc studies with full-time work. So you can present and get that peer review from other students too. Yes, and that's an interesting piece of research as well, which looked at the ability of students to peer review compared to the ability of lecturers, and it was about 10% less effective. So still incredibly effective. Yeah, so the students' feedback was almost as good as the lecturers. And I like that, acknowledge their assistance, absolutely. Yeah, be clear about that. So these are some web pages that I've mentioned as I went through, and those are some tools. This little one here, the Writer's Diet, is a nice one. It's created by Professor Helen Sword of Auckland University, and you can copy your work into that link there, and it will tell you if your writing is lean or rather flabby. And again, she's using similar tools to Grammarly. So looking at repetition, zombie nouns, too many prepositions, or too many back referencing devices. So again, it's like having another proofreader, another editor in your pocket there. Here are our lovely learning advisors, just in case I need to sell them anymore. So yeah, do book an appointment. We have, as I say, we do them online. We're fully aware that our students, like ourselves, are very busy people, and those are just their details there. These are some of my favourite books on reflective writing that are in the library. And remember that if things aren't in the library here, your subject librarians can move them from across all of Aotearoa, or indeed across the globe. You just use interlibrary loans to do that. So just, I'm aware that I've used up my time. I can see the next class trying to come into this lecture theatre here, but I'm just interested to know what you might take away from this session. What might you don't have to give me 3, but maybe you could give me 1. Is there sort of one thing that sort of struck home that you think you might apply or use? Great, yes, I think it's all about that criticality. So don't be afraid to criticize yourself. Yes, and thank you. Like that sort of scaffolding. Yes, make that really explicit. Sometimes, we're not quite sure how the literature is being woven in. So it's worth making that quite clear. Great. Thank you very much. So I'll just bring you back up here, just in case anybody has any final questions or comments. Yes. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how powerful looking at examples of good and excellent and even not good, but looking at previous examples I personally find really, really helpful. So Peter, I just is there anything at all I can clarify, or I don't want to outstay my welcome?
Oh, you've done. Oh, right. That's clever of you. Right. Well, really, I want to make sure that Rochelle has a first chance to ask any questions, asking questions on his behalf or on behalf of other students.
Absolutely.
and also Rochelle. Obviously, some people are busy at lunchtime and have got other things to do, but would you recommend that they see this video
Yep.
in
Yeah,
preparation?
yes, today when I go to, because I have my classes at 5:30, so I will be meeting some of the students. I will tell them to go and have a look and then get some idea how to write the critical reflections and everything.
Thank you,
Great,
Rochelle.
thanks. I was just trying to write another takeaway, and I was going to remark that writing a reflective essay is not a last minute thing that you can just crash out the night before. It's something that you can chip away an hour or two a day, and perhaps even over a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
And even if you just write, I find I'm an engineer. I hate writing. And sometimes it might take me an hour to write just a bloomin' couple of sentences or a paragraph. But do it. Spend the hour. Get the 2 sentences down. And move. You've put something away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And there's a great book actually by Rowena Murray called How to Write a Thesis, which just says exactly that. Just force yourself to answer the question, and reflection kind of lends itself to that quite nicely. If you say, well, okay, I'm going to use Gibbs, more or less combined with Moon or something, and so let's just write little 3 lines for paragraph 1. Let's just keep it going, and keep coming back to it. Can be really, really helpful there.
Glenn, I'd be keen to hear what Glenn's reflection is on all of this.
Yes. Excellent. Great. Oh, sorry, Glenn, I think you might have your mute on if you wanted to say something.
No, it's good. The reason I wanted to join is because I've got my class doing a reflective essay, and it's always good to learn new things or to kind of get a good solid refresh and look at the takeaways that I can share with students in the future.
Great. Oh, thank you for that. But I'd be very happy as well, like if you wanted anything tailored down, specifically to a particular assignment, we're always happy to come in and do that. So do let us know. And obviously Peter's recorded this, which is great. So you've got a kind of, hopefully, a Zoom. And Zoom's great, isn't it? Because it spits out a transcript as well. So it's really helpful.